The dinner was in 6 hours, and Lydia Wrentham had not yet decided whether to attend as herself or as the woman she had been pretending to be for the past 3 weeks. She stood at the narrow window of the housekeeper's room. Her room now, technically, though the words still caught in her throat, and looked out at the east garden. She knew that garden. She had played in it as a child, had torn her stockings on the iron gate at the far end, had hidden behind the yew hedge when her father's solicitor came to call, and the adults wanted the house to themselves. She knew which flagstones were uneven, which rosebush had thorns that curved inward rather than out, which corner stayed warm longest in October because of how the wall caught the afternoon light. None of that knowledge belonged to a housekeeper. She turned away from the window. The letter had arrived that morning, not addressed to her, of course, but to the estate itself, in the formal language that meant a significant visitor was coming. The Duke of Keswick would arrive by 4:30. There would be dinner at 8. The household was expected to present itself. Lydia had read the letter twice, then set it on the desk where she had found it, and gone about her morning as though her heart were not doing something quite alarming in her chest. She had been at Wrentham Hall for 22 days. She had told them her name was Mabel Greaves. She had produced references, forged, carefully, by a woman she had paid too much money to, and trusted rather more than was wise. She had been hired as second housekeeper to Mrs. Cawley, who was 63 and suffered terribly from her knees, and was therefore grateful to have someone capable of managing the stairs. What she had not told anyone was that Wrentham Hall was her father's house, that it had been her father's house until 4 years ago, when he died intestate, and the estate passed to a distant cousin she had never met, that the cousin had sold it the following year to the Duke of Keswick, who had never set foot in it since. Until tonight, she straightened the keys at her belt. They made a sound she had heard her father's housekeeper make 1,000 times, a small administrative sound, the sound of someone who belonged to a house through function rather than name. She was learning to belong that way. She was not certain she was learning it fast enough. Mrs. Cawley found her in the silver room at 10:30, cataloguing the pieces that would be needed for dinner service. "The Duke's man arrived an hour ago," Mrs. Cawley said, settling herself into the chair she kept in the corner for exactly this purpose. "Sent ahead to check on the state of the kitchen, which I found presumptuous, but there we are, and was it satisfactory?" He said so, in that tone men use when they mean they expected worse. Mrs. Cawley watched Lydia set down the fish fork and pick up the next piece. "You have a good eye for silver. My mother kept a tidy table," Lydia said, which was true and which explained nothing. Mrs. Cawley was quiet for a moment. "The Duke hasn't been here since he purchased the property. 3 years, nearly. I don't know what he'll make of it. Has much changed? That depends on who you ask. The east wing roof was repaired last spring. Previous owner had let it go badly. The kitchen garden is in better shape than it's been in years. But the drawing room wants new curtains, and the library." Mrs. Cawley paused. "Well, the library is as it was." Lydia kept her face very still. "As it was. The previous family's books are still there. All of them. The new owner, the Duke, he sent word when he bought the property that nothing in the library was to be touched. Strange instruction, but we followed it." She shrugged, the pragmatic shrug of a woman who had followed stranger instructions in her time. "Perhaps he's a reader." Lydia said nothing. She picked up the next fork and held it to the light. Her father's books. 3 years, and they were still there, untouched, exactly where he had left them. She did not know what to do with that information, except carry it carefully, the way you carry something that might be more fragile than it looks. The Duke arrived at 4:20, which was earlier than expected, and therefore precisely the kind of thing that disrupted a household. Lydia was in the entrance hall when it happened, not to greet him, that was not her place, but because she had been managing the positioning of a flower arrangement that Mrs. Cawley had declared wrong twice already, and she had been attempting to make right. She heard the carriage on the gravel, heard the door, and then there was simply no dignified way to be anywhere else. He was younger than she had imagined. She did not know why she had imagined someone older, perhaps because the purchase of a house like Wrentham Hall felt like the action of a man who had been accumulating things for a long time. But the Duke of Keswick was perhaps 35, with the kind of face that looked as though it had made a decision early on about not giving much away, and had been disciplined about it ever since. He handed his coat to the footman without looking at him. His eyes moved over the hall in a way that Lydia recognized, not the look of a man admiring a room, but the look of a man taking inventory. She stepped back, as was appropriate. She was staff. She was Mabel Greaves, second housekeeper. She had a specific kind of invisibility available to her in this role, and she intended to use it. His gaze passed over her once, and then returned. "You're new," he said. Not to her, to the room in general, the way people speak when they are certain someone will answer. Mrs. Cawley stepped forward. "Miss Greaves joined us 3 weeks ago, Your Grace, second housekeeper." He looked at Lydia directly now. She met his eyes for exactly the length of time that was appropriate for a member of staff, not too long, not evasive, and then looked slightly to the left of him, which was the correct spatial position for this conversation. "Miss Greaves," he said. "Your Grace," she said. Something crossed his expression. She could not have named it. He moved on, and Mrs. Cawley moved with him, and Lydia went back to the flower arrangement with hands that were entirely, impressively steady. She did not think about him for the rest of the afternoon. She was very busy not thinking about him. There were menus to confirm, a misunderstanding about the second-best tablecloth to resolve, a footman who had somehow managed to put a candle in the wrong bracket in the dining room and could not be made to understand why this mattered. She moved through these problems with the brisk competence she had been cultivating for 3 weeks, and if her mind kept returning to the particular way the Duke had looked at the hall, that inventory look, that look of someone trying to understand what a place was, she managed not to let it show. It was only later, when the dinner reparations were well in hand and she had 20 minutes that were technically hers, that she allowed herself to go to the library. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it in the same way you know a great many things that you do anyway, fully, consciously, with the complete understanding of the cost. The library door was unlocked. It always had been. Her father had believed that locked rooms were a kind of argument, and he had disliked arguments. She closed the door behind her and stood in the dark for a moment before she lit the lamp. The books were there, all of them, just as Mrs. Cawley had said. Her father's collection of natural history, 3 shelves of it, the spines going from deep green at the top to a faded olive at the bottom because the light from the east window had caught that corner every afternoon for 30 years. The novels her mother had bought in Bath and never quite got around to reading. The complete run of a legal periodical that her father had subscribed to out of some vague sense of civic duty and never once opened. On the second shelf from the bottom, third from the right, a small red volume that she had read so many times the spine was soft as cloth. She did not touch it. She stood and looked at it and breathed, which was all she trusted herself to do. "I had wondered," said a voice from the doorway, "who came in here." She turned. She did it slowly because she had learned in the past 3 weeks that slowness reads as composure, and composure was what she required. The Duke stood in the doorway. He had a glass in his hand. He had been in the dining room, she thought, having the meal set up for his inspection, and he looked at her with that same expression she hadn't been able to name in the entrance hall. "Your Grace," she said, "I apologize for the intrusion. I was checking. "The books are in the same order as when I purchased the estate," he said. "I've verified it twice. I always do when I arrive." She didn't know what to do with that. "I see," she said. "Do you?" He came into the room, not toward her but along the shelves, the way you move in a room that interests you. The previous family left everything. The solicitor said it was complicated. A young woman, apparently. The daughter. The estate went to a cousin who had no interest in it, and she was removed from the situation rather more quickly than was kind. He stopped at the shelf with the natural history volumes. The cousin told the solicitor that she had taken what she wanted. I've never been certain that was true. The lamp was warm on the side of her face. She was aware of her hands, of where they were, of what they might do without her permission if she didn't attend to them carefully. "The books suggest a family that read," she said. "The books suggest a family that lived here," he said. He turned to look at her. "Which is a different thing." She said nothing. "How long have you been in service, Miss Greaves?" "Several years," she said. "In various households. You hold yourself differently than most housekeepers. I will try to correct that. I didn't say it was wrong." He looked at her. For a long moment, the lamp between them made shadows that moved slightly in some draft she couldn't locate. "This room has a particular quality to it. I've noticed it each time I've been in it. It feels inhabited, even now. Does that seem strange to you?" "No," she said, before she could stop herself. He waited, in the way of someone who understood that silence was an invitation. She did not continue. She looked at the floor, the appropriate 16 inches in front of her feet, and she said, "I should return to the preparations, Your Grace. If you'll excuse me." He stepped aside. She walked past him, close enough that she could have touched his arm if she had reached out, which she did not. At the doorway she paused. She did not turn around. "The red volume," she said. "Third from the right, second shelf from the bottom. The binding is soft. It should be handled carefully." She left before she could hear what he said. Dinner was managed. It was, by any measurable standard, a success. The food was good. The service was smooth. The one moment when a wine glass was set slightly too close to the edge of the table was corrected before anything came of it. Mrs. Cawley declared herself satisfied in the subdued way that meant she was actually pleased, and sent the kitchen staff to bed at a reasonable hour. Lydia stayed up. She told herself it was the inventory. There were notes to be made about what had been used, what needed to be ordered. The particular tablecloth situation was not fully resolved. And these things were true, and they were not the reason. She was at the kitchen table with her notes when she heard the footstep in the passage. She knew the sound of this house's floors. She had known them since she was 8 years old. That particular step, with the slight hollow sound it made, was the flagstone just outside the kitchen door, and it was made by someone who walked with deliberate, unhurried weight. She looked up when the door opened. The Duke of Keswick, still dressed for dinner, stood in the kitchen doorway, looking rather as though he had not entirely decided to be there yet. "Your Grace," she said. "I couldn't sleep," he said, which was not an explanation for why he was in the kitchen, but functioned as one anyway. "I'll ask Mrs. Beecham too," she began. "Don't wake anyone." He came in and sat down, quite simply, at the other end of the kitchen table, as though this were something he did regularly. "What are you doing? Inventory notes? May I see?" She slid the paper toward him without comment. He looked at it, genuinely, reading her careful columns of notation, and something in his expression changed slightly. "You've listed the books from the library," he said. She had. She had not realized she was doing it until the list was halfway done, and then she had continued because it seemed dishonest to stop. "The library inventory was incomplete," she said. "It seemed sensible to address it. You know the collection. I've spent time in the room, Miss Greaves." He set down the paper and looked at her. The kitchen at this hour had a different quality. The fire low, the house quiet, the formalities of the day wearing thin in the way they do in the small hours. I am going to ask you something, and I would like you to consider answering it honestly. She waited. Wrentham Hall was owned by a family named Wrentham until 4 years ago, he said. The daughter of that family was called Lydia. The solicitor described her to me when I purchased the estate as a young woman of considerable composure who had managed the household since her mother's death and who was, in his words, not given to complaint, which he seemed to find admirable. He paused. I have thought about her, occasionally, the way you think about someone you know an injustice was done to, even if you had no part in it. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, something moved in the yard, a cat probably, or the wind in the kitchen garden. I don't know what you mean, Your Grace, she said. I think you do. He looked at her steadily. The way you moved in the entrance hall, the first moment you saw this house. Not the way a housekeeper moves through an unfamiliar door. The way you stood in the library. The red book, the inventory that lists the contents of the library from memory. A pause. The way you know which flagstone creaks outside the kitchen. She said nothing. There was a particular quality to the silence in this kitchen that she had known her entire childhood, the particular warmth of it, the smell of old stone and whatever had been baked that afternoon. Lydia Wrentham, he said, not a question. She looked at him. It was the first time in 3 weeks that she had allowed herself to look directly at anyone in this house for longer than propriety required. It was my father's house, she said. That's all I wanted, to see it, to understand what had happened to it, and what has happened to it. The roof is repaired. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it for being steady. The kitchen garden is better than it was in my father's time, actually. I suspect Mrs. Cawley has been firm with the gardener in a way my father never was. The drawing room wants curtains, but that's not important. She stopped. The books are all there. Yes, he said. Why? She had not meant to ask it directly. You could have sold them. You could have cleared the library when you purchased the estate. There would have been nothing wrong with that. They were your property. Why keep them? He was quiet for a moment. He turned the inventory notes over in his hands, not reading them, just holding them. Because someone had lived here, he said. Because the way the books were arranged on those shelves told me more about the people who had used that room than anything the solicitor could have said. The natural history collection. Someone bought those deliberately over time with intention. The novels near the window were read in sunlight. You can see it in the fading. The legal periodical was kept out of guilt or hope, or some complicated mixture of the two. He set down the paper. Clearing them would have felt like erasing something that deserved to persist. She was silent for a long moment. The fire shifted. You cannot stay on as a housekeeper, he said. His voice was careful, not unkind. You know that. I know. Is there something specific you came to find? Something you needed from the house? I want you to have it, whatever it is. It should be yours. She thought about this seriously, the way it deserved. Not the books. She had not come for the books, though she was glad they were there. Not the curtains or the garden or the repaired roof, not even the kitchen, with its warmth and its particular quiet. I wanted to know, she said slowly, that it was still itself, that it hadn't been made into something unrecognizable. She looked around the kitchen. It's still itself. It's actually, in some respects, better than it was. He nodded. Something in his face had settled. My solicitor will write to you, he said. There are questions about your father's estate that were never properly resolved. I would like them to be resolved correctly, if that's possible. That isn't necessary. It is, actually, to me. He stood, and she stood, and they were both standing in the kitchen at what was probably nearly midnight, which was not a situation either of them had a proper map for. Miss Greaves is a reasonable name, by the way. If you needed one. It was my grandmother's name, she said. Her maiden name, A sensible choice. He moved toward the door and stopped. The red book. On the shelf. Yes, what is it? She looked at him. He looked back at her. That same quality of attention he'd had since the entrance hall. The look of someone who was accustomed to seeing things clearly and had not decided to stop. Natural history of the county, she said. My father gave it to me when I was 9. I read it until the spine gave out and he had it rebound. I read it until the rebinding gave out too. A pause. I left it when I had to leave quickly. I regretted it. He was quiet for a moment. It's yours, he said. It always was. She did not cry. She had been not crying for 4 years with considerable practice, and she was not going to stop now in a kitchen at midnight in front of a duke she had met 6 hours ago. But something moved through her that she didn't have a clean word for. Something that felt, distantly and carefully, like the beginning of being able to exhale. Thank you, Your Grace, she said. Keswick, he said, when there are no footmen about. She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire was low and the house was quiet, and it was still, in some fundamental way that no change of ownership had managed to touch, her father's house. Good night, she said. Keswick. He left. She stood in the kitchen for a while after, her hands quiet at her sides, listening to the house breathe around her the way it had always breathed. Unevenly, warmly, with that particular creak in the east passage that meant the temperature had dropped outside. She picked up her inventory notes. She added, in her careful handwriting at the bottom of the list, red volume, natural history, second shelf, third from right, condition good, binding fragile, provenance personal. Then she set down her pen and sat in the warmth and did not think about what came next. Because what came next would come regardless, and for now it was enough that the house was standing and the books were on their shelves, and someone had, for reasons of his own, thought that deserved to be true.